Welcome to our podcast. We are so excited to have some very dear friends here with us this afternoon, and we hope this is a blessing to you. Today we're going to be talking about church planting. We're going to be talking about chaplaincy services, emergency chaplaincy services. We have two emergency chaplains with us today, along with our AMS, and so they'll get a chance to introduce themselves to you. And they'll tell a little bit about who they are. I'm Derek, and I'm a pastor in our association at Winton Baptist Church. So I want to just get started and have these guys introduce themselves to you and just jump into the world of emergency chaplains.
Hi, I'm KJ Ellington. I'm a church planter down on the Outer Banks, Avon, North Carolina, on Hatteras Island. My family's been there a couple of years, but I grew up in Granville County, North Carolina, and then the Lord called me to ministry, and I was in Montana for 16 years. But we've been back here serving on the Outer Banks, planting a church. One church, Avon.
Okay, excellent. John?
My name is John Thompson. I'm the pastor of Rich Square Baptist Church, and I serve with Emergency Chaplaincy services in Northampton County.
Okay, awesome. Great.
And I'm Greg Clark. I'm the AMS here in West Chowan Baptist Association, the best association in the state of North Carolina.
Amen. All right, well, let's jump into this. Let's start off with how did God call both of you to emergency chaplaincy? KJ, we'll start with you first. How did God call you to emergency chaplaincy? And how does that connect you to your ministry there in the outer? Share a little bit about your ministry in the Outer Banks, kind of the whole. Introduce us to that a little bit.
Absolutely. I kind of backed into emergency services chaplaincy. Growing up, I grew up in a small rural area, and one of the expectations is that you would join the local fire department. And so when I was 18, I joined the fire department in my community and served there for about 7 years before the Lord called us to Montana. In Montana, I was an EMT, and then, I've done some other stuff along the way. I was a deputy for a couple of years and I was going to be a flight nurse. It's a long story. But anyway, I've always been involved in emergency services. And when we first moved to the Outer Banks to Avon to start ministering and planting a church there, I tried to join the fire department. That didn't work out, and I was found myself outside of emergency services for a little bit. And I had a lady in the community said, well, maybe it's time for you to be a chaplain to those people. And I had never even thought about that. But my cousin is an emergency chaplain in Roxborough. Mm-hmm. And so I called him, and he got me up with the organization, Emergency Chaplains, and got me in touch with Ralph. And so I applied, got in, took the training, which is robust, mm-hmm. And then started serving. And that actually became my open door to engage my community as we were church planting.
Excellent. And we'll get into church planting just in a bit. Thank you for sharing
Absolutely.
that. John, you're another chaplain in, I guess, a different area. Also touch on that, the different regions for emergency chaplaincies and how you got started with emergency chaplaincy.
So I'm in Northampton County, and I got started later. I was never involved with emergency services until a few years ago after I became pastor at Rich Square Baptist Church. Didn't take me long to figure out that in Rich Square, love your neighbor means be on the volunteer fire department.
Amen.
So
Amen.
I joined the volunteer fire department and as a firefighter first. And then they asked me to be chaplain. I didn't want to be the guy who came on who was just the chaplain and didn't do what everybody else does and just assume that I understand.
Right.
I wanted to actually do those things and see what they're doing and be a part of the fire department.
Right.
And then, like I said, later they asked me to actually be their chaplain. That kind of expanded and went on to the Firemen's Association, okay. And then I ended up becoming a part-time EMT with the county.
Awesome.
And the ministry just kind of expanded to where now I lead all of emergency services as chaplain,
okay.
Fire, EMS, law enforcement, dispatch.
For the county, for the whole county?
For the whole county.
Okay, got it. And so they've entrusted you with that, and I'm sure that's far-reaching in terms of what you do as an emergency chaplain. I think we've kind of touched on that. Let's and we're going to go back to that. We're going to go back to what does an emergency chaplain do, just briefly here. But Greg, how can churches in our association embrace emergency chaplaincy. This is kind of it's new in the sense that our folks probably don't know a whole lot about emergency. Our churches don't know a whole lot about emergency chaplaincy, but they're familiar with the other side. They're familiar with fire departments. A lot of folks in emergency services go to churches. How can the two connect?
Yeah. Listening to these guys share, I was just thinking how emergency services is similar to the church in one way, in that if you're unchurched, you never think about the church until you need it. There's a death in the family or a crisis, and then they ask you, do you have a pastor?
That's right.
And all that. You guys know that. I think emergency services are sort of like that too. They're sort of out of sight, out of mind until you need them.
That's right.
And then when you need them, you really need them.
Yeah.
And you need their services, and you need the the care that the chaplains provide to them.
Yeah.
So I think this is sort of maybe a wake up call.
Right.
To our association, as it should be to any association,
yes, that's right.
that there's this segment of people who are serving our communities that I feel I think are neglected.
Right.
And that churches, I think, would do themselves a huge favor if they would search out ways that they could, of course, obviously pray, but support in other ways. Of course, and you guys may know better than me how churches might be able to connect the best and with those services that are in their county or region. But I think there's a great opportunity there. I think for our churches to be able to invest in the men and the women there, to let them know, just like when there is a spiritual crisis in their lives. That there are not just the chaplains, but local churches that these guys can recommend them to,
Right.
And when they're in need of spiritual care. So it's sort of I think a really an untapped area for our churches that they really need to prayerfully consider ways that they might be able to get involved on some level.
Sure. KJ, let's talk about that. Let's jump into that a little bit. First, define what emergency chaplaincy is, and then a chaplain is, and then talk about the connection between the churches, how churches can get involved, and our folks in emergency services, what is their engagement with the church in general as well?
Emergency chaplains, most people are familiar with some type of chaplain. Maybe it's in the hospital setting or something else, and a chaplain's there for you when you're going through something. But emergency chaplains is very specific towards the responder, the people who are responding to these calls on a regular basis, and to get involved with them, to earn the trust, to speak their language, and to be able to minister to them. A chaplain does not replace a pastor.
Okay.
So it's very important that when somebody needs pastoral care or something like that, that they can be recommended to a local church, or if they become a believer and need to be discipled. But for me, it's given me an opportunity to reach into a community that I'm familiar with and was familiar with, and earn some respect in the community, because as we're planning a church, one of the first things to do is to engage the community. And this provided an opportunity for me to prove that I'm an asset, not a parasite on the community.
Okay.
And so that opened up that opportunity. And what it's done is it's helped all the churches in our area, because I do recommend that they find a local pastor, find a local church to be involved in, and not see me as a replacement for that. But I am there for them when they need to talk about something or deal with something that that maybe their pastor doesn't understand because they've not worked the world or seen the world of emergency services.
Great. John, speak to this for a moment. When someone comes to a church, the goal is not to do this. The goal to get. The goal is to give. Right. Obviously, to be a presence to Christ in the community. But there is a natural connection. There's a natural flow as a result of ministry to the emergency service community that that they began to gravitate towards leadership of emergency chaplains. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, whenever you build relationships with someone in a community who's not connected to a church, they're going to tend to go towards those relationships.
Right.
Like you said, and I'll just say again, we don't do this for the purpose of building our churches.
Right.
We do this for the purpose of building God's church.
Amen.
The kingdom. It's kingdom work.
Okay.
And our first responders somewhat understand that, but they don't. I don't know if they can understand it to the fullness unless they are, in a church and they understand, the goal.
Yeah.
Because my goal is to love them and care for them with the hopes of being able to share the gospel with them in a non-confrontational way and with permission.
Right.
So the bigger, broader thing is I want to build the kingdom of Christ.
Yes, sir.
Now, but yes, there's relationships as you build them. I have first responders who come to our church. We're blessed that we have a station that is a block away from our church, and some of them will tell their partner, "Hey, I'm going to walk over to the church. If we get a call, just pick me up." Sometimes they bring the ambulance over and and just park it in front of the church. Yeah. If the lights are on, there's a reason to be concerned. If the lights are off on the ambulance, then hey, they're just coming to church.
Okay.
And it's built good relationships, and if they live way on the other side of the county, I may encourage them to consider a church closer to them.
Okay.
And anybody who tells me they're just looking for a church, if I know where they're at, I'm gonna suggest a church that I know that's near them, and let them know they're welcome to come to my church. Sure. I don't want them to get the impression they're not.
Right. Understand.
But it's not just to build. So if I hear someone is maybe working in Northampton County, but they live in Winton, I'll be like, hey, there's this awesome pastor there, Derek Davis. You should check out his church. And if they say, well, I'd really like to come to yours, I'm gonna say, well, you're welcome here too.
Yes. That's right. Absolutely.
But yes, just building those relationships tends to lead towards them wanting to at least visit and take part in your ministry in some way.
Understand. KJ, speak to the level of faith that you've experienced in working with folks in emergency services. What's the temperature out there as far as their folks that are with Christ or close to the church, not far away, to the things of God, those kinds of things?
Well, one thing you need to understand about emergency workers is that they tend to deal with people who are having the worst day of their life on a regular basis.
Right.
You don't call the law, you don't call EMS, you don't call the fire department unless something bad is happening. And so what they tend to deal with is the worst of society and the worst things that are happening all the time on a regular basis. And so what I tend to find most often is the most difficult question they have is why?
Yeah.
Why does God allow this to happen? Or there is no God.
Right.
And there's kind of an inside joke that you kind of just become hard and things don't bother you like they used to, but that's not true. They're human. They deal with that. But that's what I tend to find most of the time right now is most of the people want to know why.
Right.
And if you can give them a biblical reason, you're going to make a lot of progress. But again, it's a ministry of permission and presence. Okay. So I'm there with them. I wait for the opportunity, and then when the opportunity is there, we build bridges, hoping that we can share the good news of Christ with them.
Right.
And when that opportunity comes up, if you have a good, solid biblical answer for them, I find that most are very open. I actually led our fire chief to the Lord through some of those questions.
Okay, got it. And that was a long process, obviously.
It was a very long process, about a year, but we'll be baptizing him next month.
Amen. That's incredible. John, speak to this for a moment. The need. There's a need for folks to be emergency chaplains. How does that happen? Explain the need. Explain what someone out there watching could do if they want to become an emergency chaplain.
Yeah, the need's great.
Yeah.
there are very few places where there's lots of chaplains. Some major cities and stuff may have a lot of chaplains.
Got it.
Most of the rural counties don't. When I first started to become the chaplain for Rich Square Fire Department, I found out I was the only chaplain for any of emergency services in the whole county.
Wow.
That was a need that wasn't being met, and so the need is there. The way to get involved is to just start off by building relationships with people.
Okay.
And then I started with my local fire department, and then that expanded. But emergency services, the organization out of Durham, that's led by Ralph Thompson.
Okay.
That me and KJ both work with. He is great to work with you.
Okay.
To help get something started. It can look so many different ways.
Okay.
There are in-house programs where a department may call their own chaplain.
Okay.
Our fire departments are private fire departments. They call their own chaplain. I can be the chaplain for the county, but I can't make myself the chaplain for any other fire department because that's their prerogative.
Got it.
But stepping in and being willing to do that and find where the need is, and then, like I said, building that, whether it be serving in a role where they already are looking for a chaplain because they have a chaplaincy program or a peer support program, or starting your own thing. That's what, from Northampton County, I've worked to build a program in the county.
Okay.
And now anybody who wants to be part of that can go through training and become a part of that.
Okay. Got it.
So it depends. It's going to depend on what your situation looks like. It isn't like the church.
Okay.
Every place is different, and every people are different.
Yeah.
And so you have to find what works well with them.
Right.
Whether that be working under them, or whether that be like my situation, kind of a third party organization offering a service.
Sure. Sure. Greg, just briefly describe the landscape of our churches. We're in northeastern North Carolina. Just broad brushstrokes. What's a typical church in our area like?
Rural.
Okay.
Rural. And rural.
Okay, great. That's excellent.
I think folks outside of this area, and I think Eastern North Carolina specifically, don't understand the ruralness. And I've lived in every part of the state of North Carolina, from the mountains to the coast.
Yeah.
And but once you get east of 95, the landscape is different. Of course, the population is less.
Yeah.
And the towns, that once were thriving aren't really thriving anymore. There's just a handful that are.
Right.
It's just the nature of transition. So,
Sure.
But most of our churches are very rural, and of course, which leans into what John said. You don't have, chaplains, for these rural areas. It makes it difficult. Yeah. That's what I was saying a while ago. It's just an untapped thing that I think has been out of the mind of our churches. Not realizing there other. It's one of the things that aren't. It's not like an obvious thing.
Yeah.
You just look at it. Oh, that's what they do.
Right.
And not realizing, okay, over here's an area, that we could become involved in. But ruralness. I mean, just city churches have their own,
Got it.
challenges.
Right.
I've served in a large city, and but rural churches have completely different set
Sure.
of challenges too.
They
But I think it's wide open. I would think probably in most counties of Eastern North Carolina, that the opportunity is wide open for churches and people in churches. Whether it's a pastor, like these guys, or just a lay person in the congregation that's looking for a way to use their gifts, and especially the gift of mercy, and
Right.
that, hey, and pastors might just need to talked with some of the guys in their churches. Have you ever considered this type of ministry?
Right.
And because that's what it really is. And
That's a great point.
I think there's, again, just great opportunity out there.
And so let's clarify that you don't have to be a pastor within chaplaincy.
No.
Yeah. KJ, speak to this for a moment. You're there. Tell us a little bit about where you are. Kind of pivot to church planning just for a little bit. Your transition from, I think you said Montana.
Correct.
Yeah, you were in Montana. Talk about that transition, your partnership with NAM, and coming to North Carolina, Avon, integration of the Avon Fire Department, all those neat things.
Well, when God called me, He called me to small, isolated, remote places. That's what He gave me a heart for. That's the people that I love. That's the places that I love. And when He called us to Montana, He called us to the most isolated county seat in the lower 48 states. Wow. It was a county the size of Connecticut with only 1,200 people and only one town in the middle. And that town was 300 people. And so when we left town, it was a 70-mile drive anywhere. Wow. And very remote, very isolated, and small. And we served there for 16 years. God blessed. I learned a lot. I made a lot of mistakes. And then as we prayed about it, God was calling us to other places like that. I saw such a great need around the world for that. But specifically here in North America, there's places like that in Vermont and West Virginia, the Dakotas, out west. And a lot of those places, there's these small, isolated pockets that need a church. Yeah. And we were praying about it. We were thinking about it. And through some providential circumstances that it would take way too long to unpack, God led us to the Outer Banks. And I wanted to know kind of what was going on with church planting on the Outer Banks. So I got up with Mike Pittman, who is the head of Send NC, which is a collaborative effort between North American Mission Board and North Carolina Baptist. So we got up with him and found out that there was lots of opportunity out there, but it took the right person to kind of do that. And so we went through the NAM assessment, and we were endorsed as NAM church planners, and we moved out and started the work. And what a lot of people don't realize is church planting actually, works backwards from what most people think it works. First, you go into a community and you engage the community. You make disciples, and then you plant a church. Okay. You don't plant a church to make disciples to engage the community. It works the opposite way. Got it. And so working to get into the community is hard. Yeah. One dynamic of small, isolated, remote places is that it feels like a closed community because they have to depend on each other. And so when a new person comes in, they're like, can you be trusted? Are you going to last here? Right. Since I've been there 3 years on the Outer Banks, we've already seen several people who had moved in and left in that amount of time. Wow. Because it's hard to live in those places. And so it takes time to do that. And this was just a door that God opened up for me to engage. It started with me trying to get on the fire department, and then Miss Betsy mentioning maybe you can be a chaplain. So I went and got trained and certified and was waiting and still couldn't get in. I was trying to visit places, and I couldn't do it. And then through some connections that we had, I learned that there was a need for a chaplain for highway patrol in that district. Yeah. And I was able to get in there, and so I serve as a chaplain for highway patrol in District A1. And then as I started to continue to build relationships and prove that I was able to get into the fire department. We actually started meeting in the building first as our little Bible study, and built relationships with some of the firemen, and then I was able to become the chaplain there. And then after one particular fire where I jumped in and helped, they're like, "Okay, well, we'll let you fight fire too." So now I'm a firefighter as well as the chaplain there. But that's kind of how that worked, and that has actually sparked quite a few things around that people know that I'm investing in the community, which has opened up other doors and opportunities. This is just one of the things that God has used for me to engage with the community there.
Excellent. Greg or John, what are some action steps or some things that a church can do practically if they're watching? They're like, okay, I see, I hear, I listen, I get. Now, what do I do? So what do they do? Let's start with you, John. What does a church do to engage folks who are involved in emergency services?
One place to start is look for people in your church who already are.
Right.
Emergency services, people who are in that have a heart to help people. And so church people tend to have that same kind of heart.
Sure.
And so at least we hope so.
Sure.
And so there's probably somebody in your church that's involved with emergency services in some way. And that's a wonderful place to start. But what a church can do is pray. They can help resource,
Yes.
And serve. So if there's people in your church you'd like to serve as chaplains, the church can support them in helping organize that and make it happen.
Okay.
And then support them financially as well.
Okay.
As they do that.
There's a cost. Right.
So
Yeah.
there is a cost.
Okay.
If nothing else, I mean, it depends on again what you're doing.
Right.
What I'm doing in Northampton County as a offering a third party service
Right.
is 100% free to the county.
Okay.
And so I swallow my own gas and and all that.
Yeah, not literally, but yeah.
Not literally, but sometimes it feels like. But there's cost involved. There's always cost involved with any ministry. We know that, but to be able to encourage people who have a desire to serve in those areas, to support those who already serve in those areas,
Right.
And then to pray for them as well, and doing things for first responders too. I mean, there's plenty of things we could talk about.
Sure.
And maybe we will, but
Understand.
different things you can do just to show appreciation.
Sure. Greg, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think so just some practical things. A couple practical things that churches could do is have a first responders breakfast or first responders banquet, every year to recognize those. And just as I was listening to John, I thought, some of our churches may have retired first responders, in their congregations and not really know it.
Wow.
And so trying to seek some of those out. And then another opportunity, this came to my mind a couple of weeks ago. I had not heard a church do this in ages.
Yeah.
They had their missions moment during the service.
Right.
I remember years ago, you had the little booklet with the missionaries' birthdays, and somebody would get up and they would, today is so-and-so's birthday, and we want to pray for them. And it was the missions moment booklet.
Yeah.
And this church was using that. And I thought, wow. I haven't heard that in a long time.
Yeah.
So I think something like that,
Okay.
where pastors can highlight a missionary, a missionary's need, a missions opportunity, whether it's in the in your county, your community, or somewhere else around the world, or a church planter. But it's a good opportunity to say here, in this missions moment,
Right.
We're focusing on first responders today.
Excellent.
Did you know? And give them information.
Right.
About a lot of the time it is, I think, just they don't know. Right. And, like I say, unless there's an emergency.
Right.
And then there is. But I think those are two practical things that pastors could do in their churches to sort of elevate that work.
Sure. Thank you. KJ, I know that it's still, folks are still understanding what emergency chaplaincy is. So KJ, what is one of the challenges that you go through as an emergency chaplain that folks may not know about? And we could get John to speak to this as well.
I think one of the biggest things is they see people in reality. And I like to use this phrase with our church and any other opportunity that I have, is that an honest messy is better than a false piety. They know we're all messes. They deal with it every single day.
Got it.
And so we need to be authentic and real when we minister to them. Instead of saying, look at me, I've got my life all together, and I want to help you get your life all together. Say, look, I can't. I think it's casting crowns. Is like I'm just a beggar telling another beggar where the bread is. We're messy, and I think that we need to be honest about that when we struggle, because they see that.
Okay.
And I think to some of the ones that I've dealt with specifically, that's one of their struggles. I don't want to go to a church because I know these people, I've seen them, and then I'm dealing with that. So that honesty, I think, is one of the biggest things.
Okay. Sure, John. What do you think? What are some of the challenges?
Patience.
Okay.
To not treat them like a project.
Very good.
Wow.
You know, I have met some first responders who are a little reluctant towards a chaplain at first because of their involvement with the chaplain in a different agency, who was, in their words, pushy, but who obviously didn't take time to build relationship with them before they tried to move to something else. If they feel like you're there because you care about them,
Right.
and you want to be their friend,
Right.
then they are much more willing to listen to you later.
Gotcha.
So, you know, you don't necessarily jump into the gospel conversation the first time I talk to somebody, not because my goal isn't to get there, but it comes with building that relationship and to the point where they feel like they can open up about things that are happening in their life. Hey, in general, I've always felt like the best way to share the gospel with people that you don't know is hear their story, and it will always turn to some mess in their life that you'd say, I don't know how I'd get through that if it wasn't for Jesus.
Wow.
And if you take time to listen to people, eventually they're going to open up and they're going to tell you a lot.
Right.
Maybe stuff you don't want to know. Right. They're going to share it all with you. Sure. But that's when the opportunities come for real gospel ministry. Yeah. But you have to be patient. You can't just step in there and expect everybody's going to want to listen to what you have to say, or is even going to be willing to talk to you. There's one paramedic. The first time I met her, I could tell. I was doing a station visit. I didn't know her, and she was ready for me to go as soon as I got there. And I could feel that. Yeah. And I didn't stay long. I stayed maybe 5 minutes. Hey, just want to introduce myself. Now, later, I've gone and ended up spending an hour and a half talking to her. And she was driving the conversation, and I was just there to listen. Yeah. And if you're willing to take the time, God opens all kinds of doors.
Yeah. That's a good word.
Yeah, amen. Well, we're coming close to our time here, and I want to thank you guys for being a part of this show, this podcast. So I want you to leave us with perhaps some closing thoughts, some closing prayer points that we can take away as we're looking at emergency chaplaincy and what it means for the church that we go to and the emergency services folks that are in our sphere of influence. KJ?
Yeah. So like I said, with emergency chaplains, it created an opportunity for me to engage with a community that I had just moved into and they didn't even know I was coming. I just showed up. And for them, it was an opportunity to do that. And so I think it's a great opportunity for us to do. I'd encourage you to pray about it, encourage your people to think about it. I believe John was the one that said it. Look for the people in your church who are already in emergency services and see if that's an open door that God is providing. But I agree, it's an untapped area, and it's an opportunity that's standing there waiting for somebody to do it.
Amen. Thank you. John?
Yeah, it helps the church to look outside of itself, and it's a pretty ready avenue for that. You don't have to create something; it's there. But I do want to speak real quick on the joy of doing it. It is a real joy to get to serve people who serve us. Right. And that's hard to put into words. Okay. I know KJ feels the same way.
Oh, absolutely.
I kind of liken it to going on a mission trip, and you get to serve God, and you come back and you kind of miss that opportunities you had. You know how wonderful it was, and we get to do that all the time.
Wow.
And it's exciting to be able to truly have good relationships with unchurched people. A lot of church people don't have relationships with unchurched people, and it's a joy to get to do life with them and share the gospel with them. And again, people can support ministries in different way. Emergency Chaplains that we're a part of, it's echap.org. It's a website. You can give to the overall organization, or if you want to support what I'm doing in Northampton County, it's echap.org/Northampton. And you can monetarily support directly there.
And we'll throw that. We'll definitely throw that up there on the screen. Brother Greg, any last thoughts?
I'm just thankful for both of these guys
Yes.
and their willingness to see this as an opportunity, like I said, not to add to their church, but to minister in their communities.
Right.
And, I really see them as, and they are missionaries. They're ambassadors out into their communities. And I think, too, and when we think about trying to recruit people out of our congregations, is maybe helping them see, they may not be able to go to China to be a missionary, but did you know there's a mission field right here? And have you considered, ministering to those in emergency services? And so it's just a great opportunity, and I just appreciate them and how God is using that to open up this opportunity and making us more aware here in West Chowan Association, but others, hopefully, as they see this YouTube video, that if they aren't involved, that they'll begin to get involved and reach out to these guys for assistance or check in their own area.
Amen. Well, thank you so much. It's what an opportunity it is for you guys to be here. And for those of you that don't know, this is our second time doing this. And so we've had fun. And you hit that like button, subscribe button, and just leave some notes in the comments if you enjoyed it. And reach out to these guys too. We'll have some information. You can get in touch with us about being an emergency chaplain or getting involved, giving, of course. But certainly, first and foremost, please pray for KJ and for John and their churches and the emergency chaplain ministry. Amen. God bless you all, and have a great time. We'll see you later.
Amen.